And do you see my screen?
I see your screen.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, let me start the slideshow. Okay, so this is our last presentation for right now. And this is called, I changed this to the story from here because I had created another presentation about more Confederates and more members of Trinity and their impact on the community. And then came across this individual who was a member of the Trinity Church, and scrapped the whole thing and decided to do this instead because I found it much more interesting. And I also wanted to not play into the role that people can find themselves, which is talking about this type of history and only talking about the negatives. And to me, that then shortchanges people's lives and existences and only puts their lives in the box as to how they relate to the white community. And that is a disservice and one that I don't want to participate in. And I have to, at times, consciously tell myself, you know, while these other stories are important, these stories are equally important. And so that's who this story is going to be about. So we're going to talk about Albert Brooks, who was the first sexton for Trinity, and his family and all of their accomplishments and how it's tied to the work that we have been doing. So Albert A. Brooks was born in Maryland in October of 1838, and he was enslaved by Edward Gorsuch, whose name is probably known by anybody who knows Baltimore County history for the man who died in the riot at Christiana in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, while he was going there to recapture some of his enslaved runaways. And when he went up there, the town actually revolted against him, and he and his son were both killed. And Albert, it seems, was obviously not a part of that, but he purchased his own freedom. And in 1863, he enlisted in the Union Army. I don't know how he purchased his freedom. It was never specifically said, but you know, I know that he did. Though when the war ended, he worked for various farmers up in Warren until he moved to Towson, where he became the sexton of Trinity for like 20 years, until he was too weak to continue to do so. His funeral was actually held at Trinity at 2 o'clock on a Friday after his death. And his the son of Edward Gorsuch, who died right before Albert did, he was a professor, and he left Albert and Albert's sister money to reimburse them for payment of their freedom. And that was left in his will shortly before he passed. And it was like several $100s. I think I found an article that said like $300 per person, something like that. And then the rest was all family members who received this. And they had a tavern that was up north, and there's a marker for it. But the son who passed, who was killed in this riot, actually went to school with a very famous person, Booth. When Booth went to school, what is now the Manor Tavern, which at one point was actually a school. And both of them went to school there at the same time and had a friendship. So apparently the death of this man dying during this recapture incited Booth and really made him more charged in his believing, apparently. And so that's one of the things that has been cited for his then fatal plan of assassinating Lincoln, is what I read. So here's Albert Brooks. He was in the 19th, the B I mean, the E Company of the 19th Regiment of the U.S. Colored Infantry. Here it says he was 25, 5 feet, 4.5 inches, so not a very tall man. And he was a laborer at the time. And he joined in May of 1864. And it said there that he was actually looking to leave at the end of the war, but they wanted to keep him a little longer if they could, in order for him to be a cook in the for the Army. In 1902, his wife received his soldier's pension after he died, and at $8 per month. So I thought that was really interesting that that was in the paper as well. So what we have here is, it says Roger W. Brooks, a highly respected man in Towson, died at his home in Towson after a few days' illness from pneumonia. He was the nephew of Albert Brooks, and he was a coachman at Shepherd Pratt Asylum for several years, had a wife and 2 children, and he was raised by Albert Brooks in Towson. And he died in 1900, right before his uncle died in 1902. And so we have the will, Albert left a will for his family. He gave William Henry and Albert Brooks a sum of $5 each, and all the remainder to his wife, Sarah, for life, and after her death to his son, Charles W. Brooks, for life. He had 3 sons, William Henry, Albert A. Brooks, and then Charles W. What they also received were homes in East Towson. So we're going to see that in a little bit. And so that is very significant for the building of estate for him and his family as they go forward. So Albert died on June 25th, 1902. He was 64.8 years old, and he died of Bright's disease with a heart disease as well. So he was sick for a little while. And what we see down here is R.C. Massenbury. This is the name that we saw multiple times. He's the person who attended Howard Cooper's Inquisition and was is a known Confederate as well, but the doctor in Towson and the coroner at the time. So this is the house as it looks today. 423 East Pennsylvania Avenue was the house that the Brooks family lived in. They owned multiple lots and plots, and you can see here at one point the house was being sold, but Albert Brooks bought this on September 23rd, 1898. And I went through the entire like buying and selling. And so what you see here is that this was going to be for sale on March 24th, 1908. And it says that it's conveyed by Albert and his wife to Albert A. Brooks. And so there were 2 lots that were owned by him next to each other. And one they no longer had, but another they kept, and they kept for a while. So here's Albert's family. We have Sarah, his wife, born in 1845. I don't know when Sarah died. William Henry Brooks. I was not able to follow him. I believe he went to Philadelphia, but with the name as common as William Brooks, I don't want to make guesses without having some substantiation. Albert Alonzo Brooks, 1867 to 1926. This is the son who stays. He's a junior and he stays in the house, and so does his family for generations. And then Charles W. Brooks, 1869 to 1937. Okay, so this is his son, Albert Alonzo Brooks. In 1900, he's living with his wife, Hattie. Her maiden name was Sims. She was born in August 1866, and they have a few children: Sadie, Hattie, Mary E., Margaret, Albert A. Jr., which is more like Albert III, and then Charles O. In 1910, you see Albert again living in the same location. His family is getting a little bit older, so they're getting jobs. You have Sarah E. as a house girl for private families. Margaret does the same. And then in 1920, we have Albert listed as a gardener, and Hattie is a jantress at a bank. His son is a blacksmith, his other son is a laborer at a factory, and his other son is a clerk at the drugstore. So the girls have moved on, most likely to get married or to live in someone else's house. And here we can see when he died that they were living at 423 East Pennsylvania Avenue in Towson. And then it says, copy this New York and Boston, Mass papers. That's because his children had moved on to different locations and wanted to make sure that that information was sent to where they were living, to their family and friends. And they actually had a funeral for him at Trinity, which was a pretty big deal. Again, this is 1926. And then he was interred at Mount Olivet Cemetery, which is what we now call Pleasant Rest. So here's the Albert Sr.'s other son, Reverend Charles W. Brooks, whose story is so very interesting. He was born on the Hampton estate to Albert and Sarah. So that then says to us that at that point in time, in 1869, Albert is working at Hampton, so with the Ridgeleys. So that can also help to explain how he gets the job as sexton in the church. Charles marries Caroline Ockermy, who was described as being of mixed race, having most of her family on one side as American Indians. And she was born in New York City, and they got married in December 29th, 1897 in Baltimore. They had Victor, their son, born in Birmingham, Jenny, their daughter, born in Birmingham, and their son, Charles Jr., born in Birmingham, who practiced medicine in Detroit. And then when his wife passed in 1918, his second wife was named Dory Albert Smith, and they married in 1921 until his death. So here's actually a picture of him. Reverend Charles W. Brooks was educated in Baltimore County and received his seminary degree from King's Hall, which is now Howard University. It was just a seminary at the point. And he graduated in May of 1896. He was ordained at St. Anne's in Annapolis, which was a white church, a white Episcopal church in Annapolis. And he was talked about in the papers as being one of the class of Sunday schoolers that had attended the beginnings of Trinity and had gone on to seek a career in theology. So he's, one of, I guess, Trinity's sons in that thought process. He is served as an assistant to the rector at St. Anne's, and then he led the African-American chapel that was there, which was separate, called St. Philip's. And then he was recruited to go down to Birmingham, Alabama, to St. Mark's Church and School, where he headed the school there and was also the reverend for the church. And this location is around the corner from the Civil Rights Museum that's there now. It's a location still there, but not as a school. So he obviously comes to visit his family often, and every time he comes, it seems that Trinity has, and this is very new news to me when I found this, that Trinity had a service and he was the one who led it. So in November of 1896, there was a special service for colored people, as it states, that was held at Trinity. And he was the one who did the sermon while Reverend Powers was there. And he, speaks to him being recently ordained and that he was the son of Albert Brooks. And so it's really exciting to see this because it was not something I had found in Trinity's history at all. And to know that not only did he lead the church, but that the African-American community was welcomed into Trinity to listen to him give this sermon. And then we see it other times here. So in December of 1897, that is when he was ordained by Bishop Parrott at St. Anne's. The sermon was by Reverend W.V. Tennell, colored warden of King Hall Seminary, which again is Howard, where Mr. Brooks graduated. He was ordained the deacon in September 6th of the same year at St. Peter's Church in Baltimore, and he's from Baltimore County and was a member of Trinity Parish. And since May of 1896, like I said, he had served as the assistant to the rector. In the service, we can see there it says, "Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I unto the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth." The large congregation was present, including the governor and his family at the time. And then that night, Bishop Parrott confirmed a class of 7 at St. Philip's. So it's pretty interesting to make the paper. And it seems that Reverend Charles W. Brooks made the paper every time he came back to Baltimore, which wasn't as frequent as I'm sure his parents would have liked. But he had a really interesting position. So he was married, as you can see, to Caroline Gearing. She's the daughter of J.F. Gearing, and actually she's not the daughter of J.F. Gearing. That was her aunt and uncle who took care of her in Baltimore after the passing of her mother. She was born in New York and then came down here, but they got married at St. Mary's Protestant Episcopal Church on Orchard Street. And again, it just gives you a little bit of information. He was 26 when they got married, and he had at that time been ordained already. So this was right after. This is December 29th, 1897. So Charles's life is really gearing up at this point. And so here in March of 1898, it shows that he was called to St. Mark's Church, an academic school in Birmingham, Alabama. And at that point, that's when he leaves to go down to Alabama to this school. Like I said, he does come up, and this in 19th of August, 1901, this is a year prior to his father passing. He came and he preached again at Trinity, and the invitation was given to the colored people to be present, and a number availed themselves of the opportunity. The clergyman is a rector of St. Mark's, and so again, he was at Trinity. And it shows here that his wife, how he met her, was that she was married a former teacher in one of the colored schools of Baltimore County. So it'd be lovely to know who, which school that is. I just don't know at the time. So it seems like every time he came home to visit, Trinity made a purpose to have him preach.
So I want to jump in. Mm-hmm. What paper were these all published?
All from Baltimore Sun.
Okay, cool.
Yep. Or the Baltimore Union, Baltimore County Union, one of the two, but usually the Sun always covered this. There was always a section on what was happening in the churches.
Cool.
So this is the St. Mark's School. This is it prior to a fire that wiped out the top floor. So you can see when they rebuilt it, they just took off the top floor, and the rest of it remained the same, but it really changed the look. And that is how it kind of looks today. You wouldn't have known that it had these tires, spires and steeples, because it now looks like a warehouse, and that's kind of what they use it for, with like mixed use actually. But it was called St. Mark's Industrial and Academic School for Colored Girls, and then it was later just turned to St. Mark's Academic and Industrial School. It was a private school, so there was a tuition, and people came from all over the country to come to this school. But the tuition was very nominal, and oftentimes they would utilize fundraising in order to have people come to the school. So it was the first institution in Birmingham to offer secondary education to Black students. The parish began teaching a small group of 8 students in 1891 with 2 female teachers, both being white, who came to Birmingham from New York and Michigan. And then the school building was completed in 1892, and it's located 18th Street and Avenue C on the south side. And so shortly after the school really got its legs is when Charles Brooks came. So a lot of the excitement happened after he arrived. So in 1899, he came to Birmingham. And so he served as the rector of the church and as the principal of the school. So a lot of time he was not able to do traveling to come back. So that's why I say when he did, they made a big deal of it, because I'm sure his parents were over the moon when he visited. He added a high school in 1900, and that's when he gave the first high school diploma. So at that point, St. Mark's, again, was still only female students, and they boarded at the school. And because it's called an industrial school, it means you leave with a trade, which for females was homemaking, cooking, sewing, laundering, and domestic servants. But then as the school grew and became, boys and girls, one of the famous graduates was Condoleezza Rice's grandmother. She actually graduated from the school. And graduates of the high school often went on to Tuskegee or other colleges located nearby. And then the school closed in 1940 following the establishment of Birmingham's Public Industrial High School. So we have, this is in 1909 and this is 1923. So here we have again, this is an advertisement for the school. It's day and boarding school for girls. Boys under 14 admitted only as day pupils. And this is in 1920. And you can see W.C. Brooks down here advertised. And in 1918, when Mrs. Brooks, Charles's wife, died, this was the advertisement for her. This was her obituary, and the funeral was largely attended. She worked as a teacher at the school and was a pillar of the community. So it just really garnered that much attention. And she had young children at the time. So, and this gives, a background of her life. And, it seems as if the community really rallied again around that family, which is wonderful to see. And up here in 1937, you can see that the Reverend Charles Brooks, he had spent the past week up in Detroit visiting his son. So it's just so nice to see these spirals of like movement and still, visiting and family connections. It's wonderful to see. And so that's basically all I have. There was a lot of time at that point where we discussed with Nancy Goldring, who is the president of the Community Association in East Towson, talking about her plans for a potential trail, a history trail that would go through the sites of importance, and not only just a trail where you would walk, but you would walk and learn. So there would be installments on the trail, historical markers and placements and stops, and utilizing different visuals and media that would take you through to Sandy Bottom, which we've talked about. Would take you by Howard Cooper's Memorial, would take you through East Towson, take you through Goucher's Land, and you would also be going through Hampton Plantation, because of the context of a majority of the East Towson residents were once enslaved at Ridgely's Plantation at Hampton. And so this is the kind of work that we're doing to reconcile what Towson once was and what we would like to see remembered and celebrated. And so this is an ongoing project, and with hopes to have a trail that is significant, but also really utilized. And heritage, nature and heritage walks are so healing, but so connecting at the same time, and really do allow people to walk in the history. And so we're really hoping that that project takes off and is completed for people to be able to live this history that we've been doing in smaller portions all over the county. So that's what Nancy was talking about. But yeah, so that's where we are.
So it sounds really exciting, because I do think the proposed trail, which goes from East Towson and kind of links the existing community to Hampton and to Sandy Bottom and to all of the places that we've talked about. It just sounds like a really exciting, and I think, I mean, educational, of course, but eye-opening for a lot of people, because I think a lot of people don't see East Towson. And certainly if they do see it, they see it not knowing the history behind it. And I'm just very excited to see how this plays out, and if we can help in any way to move that along.
Yeah, I would like to see, you know, again, to me, it would be really useful if we even had Trinity, you know, be a stop on this, because now we have seen the importance that Trinity played with the history of Hampton and the history of Towson and the history of Sandy Bottom. You know, I mean, there's so much connection there that we've only scratched the surface of. Like I said, I dropped off of doing some other histories in order to do this one. So there was another, easily a couple more presentations just about the people who belong to Trinity that really do show that it is one community. And so I think it would be a very interesting addition too, because it would be lovely to walk past Trinity and see this history somehow pop up about the sexton, you know, about Albert Brooks and his family, especially then if you walk past his existing house in East Towson, you know. So yeah, it's all very interesting and exciting and all connects, which has been lovely to see it all connect in a really great way.
I had been talking to one of our older members about this series, and again, she wasn't able to attend and is looking forward to seeing this recording. Hi, Pont, if you're watching. And she told us that one of our sextons here in like the late 70s to the mid 80s was an African-American with the last name of Goldring. So his name was Garfield Goldring. And so I mentioned his name to Nancy, and of course that's her ex-husband's family, but she's really curious to find out what connections there are. So just how enduring the connections between Towson, East Towson and Trinity have been. And again, as you said, this is moving forward into the future. How are we going to build on those connections and live out what we've learned and honor the people in our past, and also reconsider our past a little bit in the context of this huge history?
Absolutely.
It's amazing. So I can't wait to see what the future will bring for us. But thank you so much in helping us delve into this history.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Discover along with you these new things. And I'm so curious. I'm now going to call my friend who's a rector down at St. Philip's in Annapolis and go, hey, Randy, guess what?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's really wild, is that it then each of these doors that open have like 5 more doors that we need to open. And I think that if maybe other churches that are in Towson, you know, start to do the same thing with the residents who also lived in Towson, who also were touched by people who were in Sandy Bottom or East Towson, like you would see how truly the communities thread within each other. You know, there just really isn't a family who didn't know another family. It's one of those kind. I mean, it was a village and considered a village for so long, you know. So I think that's quite evident, really.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you.
Thank you.
I can't wait to see what the future brings.
Me too. All right, awesome. Thank you.